There's nothing to be afraid of if civic engagement goes well. And I, as a former elected official, I have talked to many elected officials who would rather not have more engagement. They think engagement looks like something worse than they already have, which is a bunch of loudmouths who show up at city council meetings and yell at them. Appointed officials have said similar things, although sometimes the appointed officials I talk to feel that they already know what's best for the community and don't really need to go out to the community. So if it's done right, civic engagement can bring more people to the table and help to drown out those loud voices that people are afraid of. And done right, for me, means three things. One is that it's in person in a way where there's more listening than talking, so that the people who show up are heard rather than spoken to. Too many of our public meetings involve public officials who want to lay out their vision, a police chief who says, you know, this is what we're doing already. We don't really need to do anything more than what we're already doing. Or someone else from another department who says that, you know, we have this plan that we have already had input on, and we don't need additional input. So having a gathering where maybe there are no speakers at the beginning, but it's more of a roundtable conversation where you have round tables set up around the room and people can speak in small groups rather than having one person speak while the others listen. Secondly, doing inclusive outreach to groups who are sometimes underrepresented in civic affairs, immigrants, young people, sometimes older adults. And third, using a technology that will allow people to participate without actually coming to a public meeting. I'm going to give three examples of cities that have done civic engagement around budgeting. Hampton, Virginia has civic engagement every year for their budget process. Starting in 2010, they began with a program called I Value, where they go out to the community in a variety of different forms, community meetings, online chats, drop boxes, and they had 1,000 responses back in 2010. As a result, they were able to make a 5% cut in their budget without any controversy. In 2014, they went out again, and they had 2,000 people participate. And after a number of meetings, the community suggested, rather than cutting the budget, increasing taxes by 20 cents per $100 valuation to protect their investments. Placentia, California. In 2014, the city had experienced 5 years of budget difficulties. It was a chronic budget situation. So they formed a task force of a bunch of residents from all walks of the community. And that task force held 30 meetings over a 3-year period to look at this chronic issue of budget shortfalls and came up with a plan that had short-term measures, medium-term measures, and long-term measures. And the city now has excellent bond rating. King County, Washington has an equity cabinet that seeks budget proposals every year for helping departments in the city improve equity. Now, at the National Civic League, we often say that civic engagement is not a one-night stand. Civic engagement is something that needs to happen year-round. It's something where you create a culture of engagement like they have in Hampton, Virginia, where people expect to be asked about budget matters, about other matters. And we created a civic index 40 years ago to sort of indicate what are the different measures for having civic engagement year-round. And I'll show this on the screen. There are 7 components to civic capital, our term for the formal and informal relationships and the networks and capacities that residents of a community use to solve problems and to thrive. And we have a civic index, which is free on our website, so I won't go through this. But the 7 components of that civic capital are engaged residents, authentic communication, inclusive community leadership, shared vision and values, culture of engagement, collaborative institutions, and diversity and equity. So if a community works in each of these areas to create a culture of engagement, it can solve problems year-round rather than waiting for a crisis to come along and address that matter at that moment. So we encourage folks to create a culture of engagement, and then each individual incident is much less painful when you do civic engagement.
Right. Thank you, Doug. Shane, do I just kick it off from here?
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm just getting your slides queued up here, so bear with me 1 second. I'll get your screen shared and we are good to go. Take it away.
All right, thank you. One thing that I didn't mention on my introduction, I am chair of the National Civic League and have been in the last year and a half. So have worked closely with Doug on activities of the Civic League. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about one of the strategies that we've used in the city of Decatur. And before we start the slides, one of the things Doug mentioned, I wanted to just give you an example of something that we did with our budget process that we found was very effective in getting community engagement. And we partnered and married our touch a truck and touch a budget input sessions. And so we had tremendous response and a lot of fun letting people see, you know, where some of the money goes in terms of the equipment and trucks from Public Works, and meet people that worked in all of the departments. And I think it is going to be a marriage that sticks. It was outside, and it was a lot of fun for everyone that came. So just sort of a creative way to pair some, because sometimes when you say we're going to talk about the budget, not everybody, unless they have something that they really want you to do differently, they may not show up or be engaged. And so I just put that out there. I wanted to share with the group something that we did several years ago, a process that we called the Better Together Initiative. And on the next slide, I think you'll see if it's going to move for us. We began this process by getting a group, as you see on the bottom left, of targeted stakeholders to begin to be a steering committee to sort of help us flesh out this process. It included our police chief. It included a representative from the schools, a representative from the housing authority, from our different boards. It included someone who had come to the police department with a complaint. And the group met together and sort of developed a strategy for bringing people together to talk about difficult and challenging issues. And we hired a facilitator, and you can see our first gathering was a huge success. It was on a Saturday. It was from about 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. We gave everyone food. That always helps. And we had these small group discussions that were facilitator led, where we began to talk about places that we could improve in our communication and who all the stakeholders are, recognizing that what we do, the government can't take the entire load, and nor should they, in terms of how we communicate and deal with justice issues and equity and that sort of thing. So as a part of that process, on the next slide, you can see that over a period of time with additional meetings, there were 6 focus areas that came out of that: community engagement, racially just policing, affordable housing, a welcoming and inclusive retail environment, public spaces, and transportation. And there were 625 action items. And again, they were across all sectors. How do our nonprofits participate? How do our schools participate? How do our businesses participate? What's the role of government? What's the role of partnerships? And this Better Together Community Action Plan was developed. And as you see, it's the Better Together Community Action Plan for Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement. And on the next slide, you can see some of the things that, well, this is one of the outcomes of that process, is we formed a new advisory board, the Better Together Advisory Board, that works as other advisory boards in the city to advise the city commission on issues particularly having to do with equity and how we make sure that we are meeting the needs and getting input from our entire community, not those that may just show up on a regular basis but may not represent the underrepresented groups in our community. We've used the Better Together Advisory Board we recently passed a pretty significant update of our tree ordinance. Well, we wanted to make sure that what we were doing in that tree ordinance wasn't going to be an undue burden on those who might be of lower economic means in terms of getting a tree taken down or being fined for taking a tree down without a permit and that sort of thing. So we asked the Better Together Board to vet those policies, and actually they came back with a slight recommended change and to bring that back to us. So it's a really good sounding board. We also use the Better Together Board to work with our police department to develop a suspicious activities brochure, as opposed to, and we take that out into the community and say, when you call the police department and we don't want you to describe a suspicious person, we need to know what are their activities that are making you think they are doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Are they going down and trying to pull on car doors, or are they looking in mailboxes? Not just, it looks like somebody that hasn't walked through my neighborhood before. So, and that's been, I think, a really successful sort of effort on the part of the city. They participated in our Affordable Housing Task Force initiative. And if you'll move to the next slide, it shows a few of the other things that we have done through the Better Together Advisory Board. Every year, we recognize what are called welcoming businesses in the city of Decatur, so that if you see that welcome mat and they have a sticker in the front of their window, someone has a resident has recommended that business be recognized as a business that values people that come in, that are kind to everyone, and is an equitable and welcoming business. And we had everything from the Brazilian capoeira studio to a convenience store to a fitness facility, and the recommendations are turned into a committee of the Better Together Board, and those are brought forward to the City Commission, and we welcome. And we have a small bookstore. It's quite an honor to receive this, and the people who recommend it say, here's why I would recommend that the city recognize this business as a welcoming business. And during the pandemic, we hosted an anti-racism speaker series and a public forum on equity and racial justice. Very well attended, and certainly in light of the pandemic and in light of the racial injustices, and particularly after George Floyd, we really wanted to have a forum where we could come together as a community and have these difficult conversations and talk about, what does equity look like in our city, in our policies? What else do we need to be doing? And so I think the Better Together Board has been a great sounding board. It's sort of a compass for us to make sure that we are staying on track. And it also is there to make us feel uncomfortable sometimes. And are we making sure that we are hearing the diverse voices in our community? So I thought that was important. If you're, and I think I've given on the PowerPoint presentation a link to the entire Better Together Community Action Plan. And sorry, I was reading a comment. I thought somebody was asking a question. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think in light of some of the question that was given to the audience with respect to why don't we want to take public comment. I think all of those are reasons that I hear. I think in the long run, we do ourselves and our communities a disservice if we come in thinking we know all of the answers or that some voices aren't important. I also think it's important to recognize that we don't get consensus on everything. And that is, that not everybody after a meeting, especially when there are two particularly divergent opinions, everyone is not going to go home happy. I was reading an article the other day that talks about, the democratic process. What can we do to make sure the voices feel like they have been heard and they have they understand, they may not agree with the decision, but they understand the process. We recognize that we can't satisfy everyone, but that we, and I'll read this quote, that we establish a feeling of legitimacy and how decisions are made, explaining them and the principles they're based on, and that we have to have principles that drive a decision explained to us. And so even if they're not happy with the outcome, they have at least heard the reasoning behind, and to have at least faith in the process and the decisions that were made, because we know as elected officials, as employees of city managers and other employees in a public institution, not everyone is going to be satisfied with all the decisions, but to feel like they were heard, they were listened to, and that the process was transparent. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to share, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that people may have about what we do in the city or my feelings about civic engagement.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Graham, I think we're going to turn it over to you for some observations as the discussant.
All right, I'll go ahead and unmute myself there. I think that with regards to what Mayor was saying, one of the things that stood out to me, you think about the poll and the responses to it, and then sort of the legitimacy, right, of a decision, being able to show transparency and to be able to really prove in an era where, well, yes, I think it was pointed out that local governments do have a higher level of trust. Edelman's trust barometer, if anybody is familiar, right, it does, remind us that it is lower than it ever has been before. And all of these different, sort of efforts, because they are that, right, all go back to trying to make sure that we legitimize the decisions we're making as public officials. And the poll, two of the answers, right? There's concern that the engagement might, go poorly, and we'll get, something that causes more problems than it does solutions, as well as the additional time and resources that it takes. I think both of those stand out to me as challenges that are really hard to solve, because yes, people can come out and say something you didn't expect. And yes, it's an enormous burden on staff and the advisory boards and the panels we put together. So those are super valid, but they're all in sort of an effort to legitimize the things the hard decisions that you're right, Mayor, nobody's going to be totally thrilled with at the end of the day.
I guess, just a quick point. I don't think it necessarily needs to take more time than a regular process, because you save time in the long run. Often, if you don't go out to the public and engage the public in the conversation, then you'll pay the price later on. And I think local governments, for the most part, understand this. And I would say, well over 75% of public projects involve civic engagement these days. I think the question now is just how to do it better. And many communities are turning to civic technology. Graham, like your platform, which I think is wonderful, but they shouldn't lose sight of the need to also do in-person meetings and to be intentionally inclusive of populations that don't necessarily use technology or come out to regular meetings.
I think it's a good point that we could probably elevate here. And I'd love the audience to continue to be a part of it. But Doug, I think one of the big things that I spend a lot of time pushing back on is the notion that technology means, having to go online or be savvy enough to use, Zoom or a device. But what technology in any form or fashion is simply designed to do is help streamline process and make things more efficient. And so online, in person, canvassing, physical mailers, scanning QR codes, social media, every one of those things is really, a critical component to reaching a representative sample. And technology is, that's our take, right? I'm not going to tell you which is best. That's for everybody in your own communities, based on that social fabric to decide. But we'll certainly help make it a little more efficient with technology for the staff to be able to go through that workflow and make something out of the information, because we know it can be overwhelming if it's a controversial topic, or underwhelming if it's something that everybody says, oh yeah, I don't know, sounds good. Budget could be one of those, right? And I think it was mentioned earlier, it's a complicated thing. There's language in there that I've been trying to understand since I started all this. At this point, I've been at it for decades, but getting there. And yeah, I don't understand all of it to the point where I would be able to say something meaningful.
I think both of your points that it's not an either or, it's a both and I think technology offers a way to get input from maybe especially from the, if we want to make sure that the younger population is involved. And one of the things that we went to with our city commission meetings during the pandemic is we went all virtual, and now we have every meeting is a hybrid meeting. And so we take public comment in the room first, and then we take public comment on Zoom. Makes the meetings longer, makes them can be a little more challenging to manage sometimes. Our city clerk helps me look for hands that are raised and then ask people to unmute and make their comments. And so, but it allows for people that would have a difficult time coming to a meeting at 7:30 in the evening on any sort of regular basis, if they even just want to watch and see what's going on. Our meetings are recorded. They've been recorded for a number of years. So there's always been that option they've been live streamed and recorded, but you couldn't actually participate in the meetings. So we've also used social media, and we just started our 2030 strategic plan when the pandemic hit. So our sessions we'd had a few in person, and then they went online. And I think just using QR codes, setting up surveys online has been extremely helpful. We're just wrapping up our master plan for our Parks and Rec. One of the things that we did with Parks and Rec that we'd never done before was we sent out random postcards to people and asked them to complete the survey online, or they could even call in if they, some of the folks so that we randomly generated some of the input that we would get. So maybe some people participated that no matter how hard we try to get things out on social media, in our print magazine that goes out, I think 9 times a year, we miss people. And so, but if you get a card with your name on it and said, tell us what you think and what you'd like to see with our Parks and Rec programs, then people might be more engaged. And so I feel like we really have to kind of pull out all the stops if we want to get people to engage at a level that we get a broad section.
Let me ask, if it's okay, a question. I don't know, Shane, you do like a hand thing if time is an issue here, but so John pointed out in the question and answer part of this, really a need to talk about sort of the relationship that elected officials have with constituents directly. And a lot of that engagement taking place on a personal level. And then that sort of being aside from what staff does and what we do on a more formal, participatory budgeting, right? As Doug mentioned, that is, that's a really great point. And maybe for both of you, the question is, how could we better ensure that, so say, for example, with your random mailers, provide the confidence to elected officials in that particular council district, for example, that what you heard is representative of their constituents, as opposed to sort of them having to go and say, well, yeah, but it's different on that side of the city, right? My constituents have very unique challenges, and the context is missing from, maybe your broader study. That's just a question to see if we can rebel rouse a little bit.
Well, Decatur might not be the best example because we're small and we only have 2 districts and 1 at-large position. And so, I feel like most of us feel like we represent a certain district and are elected by a certain district. But I think because we're so small, and I feel like, we really try to represent the whole community. And when we're looking at projects, we're trying to look at the benefit for the public good and the whole, recognizing that we certainly can't do all the sidewalks only on, the north side of town, and that sort of thing. But I think, and I'm sure there is a way that those responses could be sorted such that we have 1 zip code, so that's not going to work. So, but I don't know if there's a way to code them when they go out to reflect, and it may be even when you're answering the question, say, where do you live, and you can tell your neighborhood, and that might give that sort of data, so that you're at least, people may not know if they're in District 1 or District 2, but they know, what neighborhood they live in. And so that might be a way to have that. We did also with our master plan for our Parks and Rec, we did targeted afternoons and early evenings in the housing authority, and engaged the youth that were there for the after school programs, got them involved, had free ice cream, and also encouraged the kids to go home and bring their parents, and to get an ice cream, and to put stickers on, and the consultants were there to engage in person and say, I'm curious as to where you put your stickers and why that's important, or why this one area might not be important, and can you elaborate some? And some people, stayed and gave more complete answers than just answering questions with stickers. But I think that was, trying to find those targeted ways, and that's in a specific district. And we have a downtown neighbors active association, and that they're a target group on our downtown master plan. They're one of the stakeholder groups. And so that is one way to sort of be able to say, well, you represent the north side and the downtown side, and we got this input from city officials to attend those input sessions as well.
Graham, I think the other part of the answer is, now that we're here on election day, is similar to election integrity, is to involve the public officials up front in the methodology, make sure that they understand how the process will work, who will be asked, so that they have some feeling that the process has integrity. And then secondly, when you're presenting the results, to show the demographic breakdown, And I think, you could even compare it with the voting demographics, which are pretty dreadful, really, in local elections. They're not representative of the full community. So I think showing the process up front and then showing the breakdown afterwards in terms of where the input came from will help convince folks that this is representative of their population.